as I'm sure you've ascertained.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Every person that I'm doing like an interview with right now, everyone has a million things going on right now.
And it sounds like you picked some good people then.
And I'm excited. I'm excited for the rest of them. It's a lot of mental health professionals.
Nice, awesome.
Oh, there we go. Now
Yeah,
I can see you.
yeah.
Oh, whoa, is it like in portrait mode?
No, I just have an external like webcam, so
Oh, that's sick.
it's super HD, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, I just really wanted to do this just because, well, I'm graduating from journalism and I'm unsure of like what route to take really right now. And mental health is something that is really close to my heart and huge to me. And I just watched your TED Talk and your story it's kind of scary how close it is to mine and
really.
how, yeah, I'm not that comfortable enough to share my story yet like you are. Like I really admire that, but it's kind of along the same lines of like being in high school and stuff happening and then seeking out therapy. So how did you first get started into speaking about your mental health journey?
It's a good question. So for me, it started back when I was 25, yeah, 25, 26, around that age. 26. Anyway, so what happened was uh, I was volunteering at a mental health organization called the Mood Disorders Association of Ontario. And they had just started this new partnership with the Toronto Catholic District School Board, this
Oh,
program called Stop the Stigma.
I
And
know, Stop the Stigma. I used to go to a Catholic school.
what
Yeah,
school?
I went to Notre Dame.
Okay, that's like one of the few schools I only visited like once or twice.
Maybe I've seen you speak before. Yes,
Perhaps.
I've seen you speak before. That's crazy.
Yeah. So
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Notre Dame was always a good time because there was a lot of energy.
We're loud. I remember you. I remember you saying like, "Oh man, I'm gonna come here all the time
Yeah,
afterwards." Oh, I remember.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah.
Okay, sorry, go on.
No, no, it's all good. But anyway, so they were looking for two young people, or they were looking for young people to get on stage to essentially tell their story to, high school students. Um, and there was only two young people in the office, myself and another young woman, and they kind of looked at us and said, you guys,
Oh, really? You didn't
yeah,
even volunteer anything? They just like you guys?
yeah, yo. So and
Just put
it
you
was
on the spot like that.
just like that. And me and the young woman, we're both like pretty shy and like green. So we're like, whatever, we'll do whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever you want to
Yeah.
do it. So but I was very nervous. It wasn't something I would have like chosen to do myself of my own volition. But they kind of coaxed me into it and talked me into it. So I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll get on stage and I'll do it. So we spent like 2 months, 3 months preparing my very first speech. And uh, it was in November, and it was at the Japanese Cultural Center, by the Ontario Science Center here in Toronto. And I just remember, the day of, and I was super nervous, and I didn't know how these high school students were going to receive me. I'd never said this out loud for an audience before. I just had no idea what to expect. So I did it. I was like shaking. I was so nervous. I was sweating. I was really nervous. But
Yeah.
by the end of it, the reception was really good, and it was just like people were lining up to come talk to me afterward, and this
Aw.
right. And this was my very first time doing this. And people were like, "How long you been doing this for?" I'm like, "Yo, this is
Oh.
literally my first time." And like, really? Oh, you're such a natural, and this and that. And people started inviting me to talk other places, and
Oh,
uh,
wow.
yeah, and that's kind of how it started. From day one, it was just I did that first talk, and people have been asking me to come talk ever since. So I don't promote myself. It's just word of mouth, and people keep
Yeah.
asking me, I keep showing up, and so yeah, that's how it went.
That's so amazing. Well, I'm glad it worked out in the end. And yeah, Kiyosha was the person who introduced me to your page and like telling me to interview. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, that's so sick. And how was it like receiving the news of being asked to do a TED Talk? Because that's huge.
It was super dope. I kind of had an inside connection because I have a friend who had done a TED talk maybe 2 or 3 years before me anyways, and they knew a bunch of people, the organizing committee for the TEDx youth event in 2017, and they nominated me and put me forward, and
Oh.
I didn't audition well.
Well, you still got it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I could tell that during the rehearsals and the audition they were kind of like skeptical, like, are you sure this is the guy? But
I'm dead.
but for me, like, I practice is practice. So
Yeah.
I actually use like practice to work out things. I try things that may or may not work. Refine things. As I'm practicing, I'll stop and, like, you know go back and modify it, like, on the fly. So I guess they were seeing me do all that, and they're like, "Is this guy even ready for this?" But I mean, the day of, well, you saw what happened. So
Yeah, no, that you did so well. I love the way that you use, well, it was like kind of like rap, but also like spoken word to capture people's attention first. And then at the end, like it wrapped everything perfectly. Were you nervous on stage? Because I could not tell at all.
I was, what's funny? Like, before I got on stage, I was the most nervous I've ever been in my life.
Oh, really?
And if you were to like go back and watch it, you'll notice me pause for like a second or two as I come on stage, and that
Yeah.
was the point where I went blank. Like, just
Oh, really?
everything went out of my head. I'm like, what am I up here to do? Like, like, I was so nervous. But
Yeah.
then it all just came back immediately, and I just did it. And by the time I was about 30 seconds, a minute into it, I think I got like my first laugh from the crowd or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And then at that point, I was like, okay, let's go. And
Okay, I'm okay. Like it's comfortable. No, I get that. No, I feel like performing with anything, like you black out for a second, and then afterwards it just comes out like for like word vomit. So then
yeah.
afterwards it's all fine. But you talk about in the speech that you did that you come from a marginalized community. How important is it that people talk about it, especially Black men? Because I feel like a lot of the time there isn't space to be vulnerable. You always have to be strong. Because I'm also from a marginalized community. I'll tell you where my neighborhood is after this, because don't want to put that online. But I feel like there's a lot of unaddressed trauma here that we don't talk about. So how do you feel that we could do a better job of talking about it and having resources in our communities?
Well, I really think it's important to contextualize, the patterns of behavior that you sometimes see coming from these communities and from young men in these communities, because we're often kind of like double victimized, in the sense that, there are a lot of challenges for us growing up in these communities, but then those challenges manifest in other behaviors that are
Yeah.
then seen on the surface level as, you're a bad person, or you're a deadbeat, or whatever it is. But no context is given to, how did someone end up there,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And so I think it's important to have the full picture. That's why I never shy away from talking about, I come from Jamaica, and I grew up in the
Oh, half
project.
Jamaican. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Some
yeah,
people, but
yeah.
sorry. Go on.
And I grew up in the projects, and I was poor, and all these things, and when they let me, I talk about, you know dabbling in the street life, but never really getting into it. And those things are important, because people might see me now and think, oh, this is, someone who was on the straight and narrow his whole life and didn't really experience any challenges, but I've actually experienced so many. Um, and it's important for me to say that, so that, the way I look at it is, if I'm able to not just share my like experience in terms of like my symptomology,
Mhm.
but my experience in terms of the environment from which I emerged, and then I enter spaces where folks who come from places like me don't often have the opportunity to enter those spaces. If I can then say I am from this place, yet I can exist in that space, then people who come after me, who come from similar places as I do, uh, might have an easier time walking through that door, because
Yeah.
I've been the example now to say that, you know, people from communities such as the one I'm from are not always, uh, people that should be avoided, or people who shouldn't be given opportunities and stereotyped and things of that nature. Right now, I understand that, yeah, I don't come across like rough and tough and all that, but the point is that's still where I'm from, you know.
Yeah.
And so if I can emerge from out that space, someone else can do the same thing and be a very valuable contributor to society and deserve the opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not even like appearing rough and tough. I feel like for Black women and Black men, we'll always have that kind of stereotype put on us at first when meeting people, thinking that like we're aggressive if we're talking too loud, or that we can't feel emotion other than when it comes to madness. So the fact that you're able to be vulnerable and talk about it, this is kind of putting you on the spot, but can you think of a story of someone like reaching out or someone that you've helped through your own story that's been from one of these communities that's you've had like held on to you, or that you've always like realized how much impact it was?
It's hard to boil it down to one story because there have been so many,
Yeah.
right? And so I know there have been so many young men who have come up to me and said and told their story for the first time, where they
Yeah.
said, I haven't been able to say this to anybody else. And people have told me their story and like, oh man, yo, I'm such a B word or a P word or whatever. I'm
Yeah.
like, no, you're not. Like, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing and opening up and being vulnerable. So like even in those moments sometimes where we do disclose and we open up, there's still that, that voice in the back of our heads, that society's voice that is trying to condition us to a particular confirmation of what masculinity looks like.
Hmm.
And sometimes that voice is still there, even though we're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So the more and more that we can normalize these kinds of conversations, I think the more we open the door to having proper mental health, and good mental health, and to not only intervene when things are bad and in a crisis, but to be able to maintain and sustain throughout our lives in a much more just amenable way, I think, for us.
Yeah. And you talk about going to therapy. How was that? Because I also go to therapy and like seeking out my therapist. I've opened up online about it. It was tough finding a therapist that like fits for me and finding one that wouldn't belittle me being younger,
Mm.
trying to express myself in a way and like gaining that trust. So how was it for you going into your first therapy session, and how did you find your therapist?
Oh man, it was the first time the concept of therapy was approached to me. I was like 16 or 17 or something like that.
With me.
And at that point, I wasn't really interested because it was like, yeah, I'm going through a lot of challenges. Uh, but some of the things, many of the things that were producing challenges in my life, I didn't feel were one, they were changeable, or two, that I could go into a therapist's office and the therapist is going to understand what I'm dealing with. So poverty was a big thing for sure,
Yeah.
and you know, I wasn't going to stop being poor.
Yeah.
The moment I left the therapy office. But sorry, give me one sec.
No problem.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna, stop being poor the minute I left the therapist office. But um, at the same time, I was also trying to figure out how to navigate, predominantly white world as a black man, and not only dealing with racism, but also dealing with the challenges of an emerging identity, and how I can balance that identity within my own community, but also in such a way that I don't limit my professional and educational opportunities as well. In the sense that, prior to, the George Floyd situation, let's call it what it is, murder, um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there just wasn't a lot of room for you to like be black,
Yes. Yeah.
like in spaces. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So there was always, and I was always like kind of like a climber, So there was always a lot of like, how much am I compromising myself in order to, remain in the good books at school, so
Yeah.
that I can access opportunity. And then, the drawback of that where, you know, people around me who are like, yo, dude, like, what are you doing? Why are you acting that way for? Like, you're not acting like us, you know,
Yeah.
while you're in those spaces, you know what I mean? So I was dealing with a lot of angst around that. And I was like, you know, I'm gonna walk into a therapy room probably with someone who's not black, most likely a white person. How are they gonna, you know, what can they really do to help
Yeah.
support me through that, you know, these pieces of, you know, dealing with racism and then navigating identity as a teenager. um I'm like, what, how are you gonna help me? But so at that point I didn't do it. um you know, or
I
I
feel
went,
that. No, I feel
you
that.
know, right, and I went to one appointment. I'm not gonna say like I didn't try. I went to one
Yeah.
appointment, and yeah, you know, the therapist, he seemed like a really nice dude, to be honest. It was like, you know, this youngish, probably like mid-30s kind of, you know, hipster kind of dude,
Yeah.
all white guy. And you know, he seemed like he was a nice guy, but again, for me it's like he didn't give me the vibe that he was ever going to be able to understand anything I
Hmm.
was going through. So you know, I just kind of did that appointment. I was like, okay, I guess I need to try to figure this out on my own. You know, I did a couple of phone appointments as well. You know, similar thing. It just didn't feel like we ever got to that point where I could be like truly authentic. Um, I think I did the kids help phone once when I was like really struggling. Um, but then, you know, eventually, as you know, my mom got better because, you know, she struggled mightily with her mental health when I was a teenager and a young adult. As she got better, and she, I guess, from her experience navigating the system, was like, here's what you need to do. So I tried to go to my school. You know, the wait list there was ridiculous. It was,
Yeah.
it,
It's
I,
it's crazy how, like, just because I've helped a lot of people find therapy, and like even like my journey of trying to find therapy, like you're in that situation, you really need help at that moment, and by the time you get help, it's like like, do I really want help at this point? But I feel that.
yeah, so you know, so I was like, but I was really in like bad distress. I'm like, I
Mhm.
cannot wait 6 weeks for an intake appointment.
Yeah.
You know, that was like unheard of. Like not even to see somebody, but for intake. You know,
Yeah.
so then my mom was like, okay, here's your next best bet. Go to our family doctor and
Hmm.
essentially disclose to him what's happening and see what he can do. And our family doctor, he was sick. Um, so I disclosed to him and he wrote me a referral. And, you know, within like 3 weeks, I was in a therapist room with another person who was trying, and she was amazing. And we were finally able to make that connection. And this time, I think I let go of that, like, I still had a bit of skepticism around the cross cultural piece. You know, this was a white woman who was probably in her late 30s, early 40s at the time, and I was kind of had this skepticism walking in, but I was doing so bad that I was like, I'm gonna try anything at this
Yeah, you're like at that point,
point.
like anything would help.
Yeah, so then I was like, whatever apprehensions I have, I push them to the side. But she also made it really easy because she didn't come at me with that like calm, you know, soothing, like stereotypical therapy voice. You know, how was that for you? It was none
Yeah.
of that,
It
right?
wasn't weird. Yeah.
It was super real, and it was like talking to a real person. And you know, she would, you know, like, you know, she would use swear words and stuff like that. It was like
Yeah.
it was like I was talking to a real person and not like someone who was wearing a mask, uh,
Yeah.
the mask of their profession. So,
Mhm.
and I think that really helped me to feel like I can open up and also be real. And you know, she called me on my BS when it
It's
was
crazy when they do that.
you know,
Like, oh, I'm the problem. Or
but she
something.
wasn't scared of me.
Yeah, no,
She wasn't
definitely.
scared of me, and she wasn't made uncomfortable by how I showed up or my story. And you know, if there was anything that she wasn't familiar with, again, it didn't change the vibe in the room. It was just
Mhm.
kind of like full acceptance, and I think that was really effective for me.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people are scared to go to therapy because either one, they're scared that it's gonna be like that it's gonna be like, oh, how do you feel about this? Or how do you feel about that after every question that we see, like, on movies or the media, someone lying down and asking all those questions, and you're kind of like, why am I here? Or being pitied. Because I feel like for me, trying to find a therapist, like I was like, especially because seeing a white therapist, I was like, damn, like I don't know how I'm going to talk about my background and everything and all the struggles that we face, or like being from our communities and not feeling like I'm getting pitied, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah,
So
that white savior complex.
yeah, or
Sandra
just
Bullock in The Blind Side, you know.
yeah, you're just trying to like tell them your problems and they're like, oh, and you're like, no, like I want you to be real, like you were saying. But I feel like that's probably encouraged a lot of people to go to therapy after seeing your talks. Have a
I
lot of
hope
people told
so.
you that?
Um, I've had a few people tell me. I've definitely, it's a weird thing to like run into people on the street and they're like, "Hey, I saw you came to my school or you came to my work or something," and then they're like, this change happened for me as a result of, you know,
Yeah.
hearing
That
your
is
talk.
so surreal talking to you right now, just because I want to go into guest speaking and talking about mental health. And you were literally one of the reasons why I wanted to. And now I'm interviewing you without knowing that you were that person.
Right?
So,
So
yeah, that's the impact that you're making.
thank you. Yeah.
No problem. And how do you think our high schools should like implement mental health? Because I remember trying to open up my guidance counselor, and all she could help me with was what are those called? You know, our class list, like the timetables. That's all
Yeah.
they can do. Or we have social workers in school, but they don't have anything mental health wise, really, other than like stop the stigma or
Mhm.
like it's okay not to be okay. So, how do you think our high schools should implement that?
I mean, I think given the way our like school system is currently structured.
Well, not during the pandemic. Like I'm
But
saying,
even,
like
even
say it
like,
was in school
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
But even like outside the pandemic, I mean, I think about it like fundamentally, there's not a lot of space to insert mental health programming because the structure is, class, lunch, more class, and then the day is over, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it would make sense to make some space in the day, a couple times a week for students to be able to like discuss what's going on in their lives. And I had this at a school I went to in grade 7 and 8, and I didn't necessarily like that school because anyway, we could get into that at a different time. But the point is, after first period, we had this thing called advisory, and it was essentially, it was like another class, but it was like we discuss social things that are
Mhm.
happening in the world, rather than focusing on science or English or whatever it is. So you know, I think the what I experienced in grade 7 and 8, it could have been utilized better, but the idea was sound. So I think maybe something like that, where you're actually having structured time built in for students to be able to talk about what they're going through, whether that's as a group or individually, and kind of maybe building in like buddy systems. And I know that seems kind of corny, but
No, but it's true. Like it'll help a kid.
that's it, right? I also think that they work. Maybe a mentorship program, and again, some schools do this, but maybe to make it more formal. Where upperclassmen are mentoring underclassmen, so seniors a mentor, grade 9 and 10 students, for instance, and help them to like navigate not just school but the journey of like growing up, because
Yeah.
that high school is where a lot of people's challenges begin, because like that's a hard time of our lives.
Yeah.
There's like rapid change and everything's confusing. You don't really know like what you're doing.
Mhm.
Everything is kind of just really new and you're trying everything for the first time. And some of us get it right and some of us don't get it right.
Yeah.
And for those of us who don't get it right, academically or socially or romantically or what have you, oftentimes the result is, some impacts in our lives that lead to distress,
Mhm.
whether that's, poor grades or not, living up to our own expectations or our parents' expectations, or,
Mhm.
um, maybe we went to high school thinking, yo, we be, the man on campus or whatever, but it doesn't turn out that way. Maybe you end up like not having a big group and you're lonely or whatever it is, or you know things don't go the way you want them to. And then oftentimes too as teenagers we're just not, we feel emotions in a very intense way, but
Yeah.
haven't received a lot of tools and guidance with how do we work with those emotions as they emerge.
Mhm.
A thing that we don't really do well is teach emotional regulation,
Yeah.
and how to identify and then like sit with and process emotions. So I think there's more focus on those pieces, as well as the academic piece, of course, but you know just a lot more focus on that kind of social emotional piece,
Mhm.
from not just high school, but I think from day one, it would be super helpful.
Yeah, yeah. The reason why I specifically asked high schools is just everything that you're saying. It is a weird time. And also, like, I feel like in university and college, we do talk about like therapy, even though the suicide rates are very, very high
Right.
in university and college, because we think that that's going to be our life, like, for the rest of it, and put a lot of pressure on ourselves. But I feel like in high school, like, especially being a person of color, we don't really have that conversation within our households. So I feel like watching your TED Talk story, you were kind of forced to have that conversation within yours. How do you have it now?
Pretty openly, I would say, in my house. I think me also kind of being like a semi-public figure,
Yeah.
like I mean, it's like unavoidable at this point.
Mm.
And for the first little while, my involvement in mental health, it was kind of like I wouldn't talk about it with my friends and family because
Yeah.
I didn't want them to see me differently than like the person they were used to, or I don't know. I just didn't like I talk about mental health all the time. I didn't want to like keep talking about it when
Yeah.
I'm at home. Um, I mean, in general, of course, when like I've been struggling or when I have struggled, yeah, of course I talk about it. But
Yeah.
over the past like couple of years, as my name is getting out there more and like people are seeing me on TV and things like that, or articles are on the internet, or I'm trending on Twitter, which happened a few times last year.
Oh,
Uh,
have you seen it just randomly? Or do
yeah,
people like
like
send it to you? Oh,
super
that's sick.
weird. Yeah, yeah. It was like a few weeks ago I tweeted something. I was like, I don't actually go on social media that much, or maybe I do, but I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. So, anyways, I tweeted something on. It was after they found the indigenous children in Kamloops, the bodies, and I just tweeted it on like a random Sunday morning, and I just didn't open Twitter for like 2 days, and then I go back and I see like 30,000 likes
Oh,
on
damn.
the tweet, and it's being like circulated. I see people like posting the thing I tweeted, like reposting it on Instagram, and like people like quote things on
Yeah, and
Instagram.
then they take a screenshot and then put it on their story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
I
you're
was just,
just like getting all those notifications.
yeah, but the funny thing is like it was people who like didn't know. Like I would see on my own timeline people who like didn't know. Sometimes you follow people you don't know if you know them or not. It
Yeah.
was like people I didn't know or didn't know me like reposting it. I was like, oh, this is like traveling
Yeah.
far. Or yeah, I was on the front page of the Toronto Star last summer,
So
and
cool.
and they used my photograph for their tweet, and then I look on like the top 10 trending topics. I click, and I'm like, oh, that's my face.
Did they ask?
Yeah. No, I mean, you
I
sign
think
the
so.
waiver when you agree to
Oh,
the photo
okay.
shoot, right?
I was just
And
like,
then
aren't they supposed to ask in journalism? But I guess not.
yeah, once you
Dang.
sign the waiver, they could do whatever they want. It's their intellectual property. So
Yeah, that's
uh,
still sick.
but I mean, experiences like that just made it impossible for me to not talk about it anymore with my family. Not that I
Yeah.
didn't talk about it before, but what happened now is like, oh, he's out there. So like
Hmm.
this is important. So like it almost motivated them to talk more with me about stuff. So in many ways, me talking about it has opened the doors for a
Hmm.
lot of the people in my social circle or in my family to open up and to talk about it, to do more research, to read
Yeah.
more, to become more involved, etc.
And I'm sure they find it way more not that you're the go-to person, but you might be the go-to person in a lot of people's lives if you're talking about it so openly. Because, like, yeah, if you're talking about it openly, people are more comfortable in order to open up to you. So that makes sense. And every time that you do have these speeches, or that you would you just say that you guest speak and that you just you're a storyteller, basically?
Yeah, I would say so. You know, I'm a storyteller. I'm starting to move more toward also being an educator and a teacher. You know, fewer people are asking me to speak to tell my story these days, and now they're kind of asking me to like share what I think about real problems in the world and what we might be able to do to solve them. Which I
Mhm.
like because you know, for a long time, um, you know, at the beginning of my, I guess, speaking career, I was just happy to be there. I was like, cool, I get to get on
I'm happy to be invited.
you know, people clap for me, they laugh, that's fun, you know, like all of that, right?
That's so wholesome.
You know?
Yeah.
And because I didn't like grow up with a lot of confidence, you know what I mean? I was like
Yeah.
a lonely child. Like I didn't have a
Mhm.
lot of people who were like encouraging me, and you know, outside of academics, people always said like, yeah, you're smart, but like just I didn't have a lot of support, um,
Yeah.
and I didn't often feel like seen or like respected or anything like that. So
Mhm.
my notion of my own self worth was pretty low, and even some people right now would probably say that it's not like accurate to who I am and what my output is. But the point is, back then I was just kind of like happy to be there because this is like
Yeah.
the first time anyone had ever like clapped for me or or
Oh.
or celebrated me in any kind of way
Yeah.
because that didn't happen. So I was just, you know, happy to receive that. But at a certain point, I started to feel like, you know, I started to become privy to changes happening in our system with regard to the mental health, like how you know how we treat mental health, and you know I would get invited to these events where it would be like a whole day symposium or a conference, and it would be about something that I had lots of thoughts about and feelings about. But they would be like, "Oh, well, just tell your story, and then you know we'll pay you and go home," kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I was like, I want to be on the panel. Like I have things that are important to say. It's not just my experience, but like I also went to school for this, you know. And
Yeah. Yeah. You have a wait, do you have a PhD in
I,
psychology, or you did
I
your
don't. I just
undergraduate?
have my undergrad. That's it. But I mean,
Oh, yeah.
like I might as well have a PhD because
At this point.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, seriously. Like I do guest lectures sometimes in like graduate schools and stuff like that, despite the fact that I never got accepted to graduate school. But anyway, um, but um, but anyway, yeah, you know, I just started noticing that I had more to say about the topic than
Yeah.
just telling my story of trauma, and I also
Mhm.
started to feel like, you know, there were some people who wanted me to tell my story. I almost kind of felt like I was being used as a prop.
I feel that.
Like
Yeah.
here's this black guy from the projects who
Mhm.
made it out of the hood. Like I was this feel good Hollywood story. And so people, you know, I felt at a certain point that people were starting to use my story to feel good about themselves and not because you know, they saw anything tangible that they could take from it and then, you know, put into like a policy change. Uh,
Yeah.
so I started to get resentful, and
Fair. Fair enough.
people asked me to come tell my story, and I would still do it because I know how important it was to the kids.
Mhm.
But I would kind of side eye a lot of the faculty members because you know all they saw was my story and not my
Yeah.
intelligence, and
Yeah.
like not for nothing, but I'm a pretty intelligent person,
Yes, you say it.
you know.
Speak on it. You have
and,
to. Yeah.
and I always felt like, how do you see me get up on stage and deliver what I deliver, and then not see that that's a really intelligent person,
Yeah.
you
I
know? And
get that.
that used to bother me because it's not easy to communicate the things I communicate, the
Mhm.
way in which I communicate them to pretty much universal aplomb. You know, it didn't matter the audience, you know, black,
Yeah.
white, old, young, teacher, not teacher, you know, business professional, whoever. It like it worked every time.
Yeah, it's not easy to connect to people on that level every
right?
time.
And I did that intentionally, right? So for me to, I mean, yeah, it started out as kind of like an accident, like I said earlier, but
Yeah.
it got to this point where it's like, okay, I have this thing and I've discovered this skill. Let me refine it. Let me put together this essentially a show. And I did that. And, a lot of the things that I do in my talks are very intentional. The
Mhm.
way that things flow, the way certain points make sense toward the end based on pieces that were given at the beginning. Like this is all very intentional.
Yeah.
Uh, the word choice. Sometimes the length of the sentence. I shorten sentence to make things more urgent
Mm.
or impactful. Like these are things I'm doing
Yeah.
very intentionally. So for me, it was like, how do I get up on stage and demonstrate this capacity to deliver this performance, but also the capacity, you know, to navigate a very challenging life with not a lot of support. How are you not seeing me as someone who's really smart and has something to say about the system?
Yeah, it's not just
Because
a performance, because a lot of the time you can feel like it's a performance act, especially being someone like you said, like from the community and getting out of the hood and all that stuff. You can feel like they're just they're not seeing you, they're just seeing that
exactly.
act. I definitely understand that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I started to get resentful, and in a lot of ways, once George Floyd was murdered, it kind of opened the doors for people who are not black people to see us as like full people,
Which
and
is crazy that I had to take that. Yeah.
to this day it makes me very angry,
Yeah.
like really really upset to this
Yeah.
day.
Because it
And
does feel performative at this point too sometimes when they do ask like black people to be that person
and
to
sometimes it
finally speak
is,
on that stuff. Yeah.
and sometimes it is, but to be honest, like as long as the results are beneficial, I don't really care if it's performative.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care if you're doing this because you feel like you have to like not be a terrible person. But
Mhm.
the point is, if you and I and others of us are now getting opportunities as a result of that, and then leveraging those opportunities into sustainable production and
That's
being
true.
able to invest into our own lives, I'm good.
Yeah.
Of course, I prefer if it's not performative. But the point is, if more of us are able to walk through those doors and break through the glass ceilings,
Yeah.
then even if the way we got there is because someone was performative, well, now we're in the space, and now we're able to dictate, and now we're able to, influence and change the way that things work.
And it
Um,
makes a real change. Yeah.
yeah, right. But but still, the thing about you know people not seeing me before George Floyd. I haven't got over it. I don't know if I'll ever get over it. And it pisses me off because I feel like I was trying very hard to have a voice in these very important conversations with these very important people and gatekeepers, and not being provided that opportunity because all people saw was a young black man who, yeah, he was charismatic and could perform, but not someone who had things of value to say and things of value that he could add, and seen as someone who could do things that were important. But George Floyd was murdered, and all of us, I sent out a tweet like a few days after he was murdered. Next thing you know, I was on TV, and next thing you know, I was on TV over and over and over again throughout the summer, on the radio over and over and over again throughout the summer. And then I was getting invited to, do some pretty big events. I did a Bell Let's Talk panel discussion with, three other folks, and I was the least credentialed person there. But I
What are
did
credentials
no,
though?
but that's my
I know. I
point.
get what you mean though. Yeah.
But my point is, I still showed
Yeah.
up. I showed up and I showed out, right?
Yeah.
And like I took up space, and I said things that were powerful, and powerful enough that like I had Sony Music reach out to me to do some stuff with them, locally here. Youth Rex, which is a pretty big organization. I ended up doing something for them. I wrote some articles that got spread worldwide. I was able to, I did a conversation with Sophie Trudeau, the Prime Minister's wife.
I saw you say
So
that.
it's like there's probably a whole bunch of other stuff. I was on like Al Jazeera, which is like an international news station. Like I've done a lot of stuff over the past year,
Yes.
and none of this, probably most of this, wouldn't have happened had George Floyd not been murdered. Because then the spotlight to see me as a full person who has like real thoughts about things, um, that wouldn't have been given to me. So I'd probably still be just out there talking to people about my trauma, and that's it. So yeah, I'm pissed off about it, because I think about all the years that might have, that I could have been making progress, it not just on a personal level in my
Yeah.
career, but in terms of supporting change in our communities and in our society. And that was denied to me because of unconscious or unconscious bias, that resulted in people only seeing, my quote unquote feel good success story, the blind side, or
Yeah.
all those movies that celebrate these black kids from the hood who
Yeah.
get
And
helped by someone who's not from the hood, usually a white person who
benefiting from people's trauma. Yeah,
exactly, right.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
that so um yeah, I don't remember what the question was, but I went on a tangent.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's more a conversation more than like an interview. But no, I definitely I understand that feeling. Like I literally just didn't it was an internship and they were looking specifically for like a black writer. And you feel that when you're going into these fields that like you studied for, you're just like, oh, now finally I get that space. But at the same time, it is that not it is the same time, like finally, yes, we have a chance to put an input, but why did it take this long?
And
Like
why
I
did it
can't.
take what it took? For me, it's not
Yeah,
even time
exactly.
as much as why did it take this gruesome murder,
Mm-hmm.
and not just, it wasn't even the gruesomeness of it that shocks people. It was the recording and the inability to justify what happened. Because
Yeah.
in other incidents, it was, why was he selling cigarettes on the block? Or why were they moving a certain way in the store? Michael Brown. Why was Tamir Rice playing a particular way in the park? With the gun. Why would, like, it was always there's, oh, why was Philando Castile smoking weed in the car? Like
It's like,
there's,
why were they
right,
killed?
like exactly.
Yeah.
But the
But
focus was never on like why were these people unjustly murdered, regardless of what their past was. Right. At the end of the day, the police officer has the responsibility to preserve life,
yes.
if at all possible. And disproportionately, our lives, Black people's lives, were not being preserved in interactions with police,
Yes.
right? But there was always some kind of justification as to
Oh
why
wow.
the officer was, they were confused or whatever. They had reasoning to do what they did. But in George Floyd's case, there was nothing that could be used to justify
Mhm.
what happened. And that's the only reason why it was so powerful, and why it demanded change on a widespread scale, like we have seen, in terms of like at least a response for people thinking like we got to do better. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm pissed off about it.
No, I'm pissed off about it too. Don't worry. Like this is constantly a conversation that I'm having in life just with people and even organizations. I'm like, how yeah, I feel like we could go on forever with this, but that being said, the original question I was just asking, like, what was the main message that you want people to take away every time that you are contributing to a talk or you're on a panel?
I think probably the main thing that I really want people to get is that change is possible.
Mhm.
And whether that's change in our own personal lives, excuse me, and our own circumstances, or that we can change how the system works and operates,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause we all walk around saying, "Oh man, it's hard to change personally," or people don't change, which means our relationships won't change and we should abandon them, or that the world isn't going to change, hence we shouldn't try. But if you actually try, you have an opportunity to succeed. And I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of successful people, and I've had the opportunity to like listen to podcasts with like a lot of successful people, top business leaders, influencers, athletes, entertainers, whoever, people who are just very successful at what they do. And, a lot of them say something that I find to be very interesting. And they're like, sometimes people assume that people who are very successful, they're competing with millions and millions of people to get to that point. But the truth is, they're actually only competing with, a few hundred or a few thousand people, because millions and millions of people will express a desire and say that they want something or they want to succeed in a particular area, but they don't actually try. They don't
Yeah.
actually do anything, or they kind of half try, or they dabble. They don't really invest and go all in. There's only a few hundred people or a few thousand people in the world who go all in
Hmm.
into something, right? And those are the people who we end up looking up to and saying,
Yeah.
oh, they're dope, oh, they changed something, or they were transformative, or they were inspiring, or what have you, right? So hopefully, one thing I hope people can take from my message is that when you try and actually fully invest, it's not as hard as you think it is. It's still
Hmm.
hard, but
Yeah.
getting the thing you want is actually not as hard as you think it is, because most people aren't actually running the race.
Yeah, that's true. Wow. Wow. I'm inspired like by this whole conversation. And I'm so happy that I did this just because I was very nervous to do an interview. And this is like one of the most well done interviews that I've done so far.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much for being on here and answering my questions and giving me your time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. It's all good. I'm always happy to meet people and talk to people and, yeah, spread whatever good I can in the world. So
And where can people find you?
people can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Asante Talks. That's ASANTE Talks. No space, underscore, period, none of that. Just Asante Talks. You can also find me on the internet at asantetalks.net. So
Hey.
yeah, that's the website. I did it myself.
I
Uh,
saw it. I was just like,
yeah.
wow, with all it I love the mobile version. I'm gonna ask you what website you used afterwards because it shows all the info that you've done on the text, especially just clicking it. So it's way more easier for people to find resources and everything.
Yeah. I didn't know if that was a good format to try,
No,
but
it's a really good format. I was started clicking, I was like, wow, this is so much easier. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I guess it's working. So maybe I'll promote it more, because I was kind of like, I haven't like put it out there yet, because I wanted to
Yeah.
do some more with it. But I mean, the few people who have seen it have said, "Hey, it's dope." So I'll promote it more now. So thank you for that, Chantel.